and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I am your host, Sandy Lowres, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond who are talking about all the things other people think are taboo. You can join us at WB40.com. Before I begin today's podcast, I would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and pay homage to their ancient culture of storytelling. Today in the podcast, if you love true crime, you are really going to love our next guest. She is an Australian crime writer. She has an extraordinary debut novel. Her name is Nikki Mottram, and her novel is Crow's Nest. This is a riveting read from front cover to back cover. She writes about an extraordinarily strong woman in the child protection kind of area. Really fascinating because in real life, Nikki Mottram has a background in psychology and works in the field of child protection herself. Nikki lives in Toowoomba in Queensland, and this book, of course, is set in Toowoomba and a town called Crow's Nest. This is so riveting that Nikki has a second to this book coming out soon. This one has just been released, and her second book, Kalani, is due to be released next year. Please welcome to the podcast the delightful Nikki Mottram.
Hey there! When Sandy's not interviewing kick-ass women, she's hanging out with me at Alex the Seal, a podcast about music and nostalgia. I'm Jo Pybus, and each episode, Sandy and I talk about all the songs that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up. Do yourself a favour and search Alex the Seal on your podcast app. Love you, Molly.
Nikki, and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, Sandy. I'm really good. How are you?
I am very good. So you're up in sunny Queensland.
I am.
And I would like to say I'm down here in sunny Melbourne, but it is absolutely freezing today.
Really? Is it really?
It's freezing.
Wow. What temperature is it?
Well, it says it's 17, but it feels like 12. And but last week was 38 degrees. So what can we say? Melbs, hey?
Yeah. All the seasons.
Well, thank you for joining me. I want to say, first of all, congratulations. I'm holding it up for those that can see it. On your beautiful book. This is incredible. It's called Crow's Nest, Small Town, Big Secrets. It's riveting from the word go. So anybody who likes a bit of a mystery or true crime will really love this book. Congratulations on writing. It's phenomenal.
Thanks, Sandy.
And I love it.
Lovely to hear.
I couldn't actually put it down. And so, yeah, it was really good. So love it. I don't want to give too much away about this book because we really want people to rush out and buy it because it's pretty amazing. But I wanted to talk to you about, first of all, how it is that you came to write the novel, because you've got a really fascinating background.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'll let you jump in. Let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah. Well, I'd always wanted to write a novel, but with this one, I think really the seed of it came around when I was sitting on the train reading a coronial inquest to a 30-year-old murder, basically, and I'd been at work all day and, I'd been reading and reviewing cases all day, and I was still kind of reading this report by 7:30, and my partner at the time said, what are you doing? And I just kind of said, I'm just so engrossed in this case and I just can't put it down. And at that point, I just finished writing a manuscript, but it was my first attempt, so it wasn't particularly good. And I was a bit sort of, where do I go from here? And he sort of said, well, maybe you should think about writing crime for your next novel. And, that was just such a good idea. And I went, you know what, that's a great idea.
God, I love that. And it's kind of fascinating because you work in an area of child protection. I will say that, and I'll give them a shout out. I have the pleasure of working with some really amazing women over at the Women's Legal Service of Victoria, where they deal in, of course, family violence and child protection as well.
Yeah.
It is an extraordinary area to be working in, but sometimes a really traumatic area, right?
Yes.
To be working in.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, straight from uni, I guess I started in child protection. And so I did frontline work for about 10 years. And then kind of when I was about 30, I got into more of an administrative side of it. So since then, I've done largely case review, which is a bit of a step back from the frontline work, but, it still has its moments of difficulty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of vicarious trauma, I think, in these sort of areas, and even regardless of the role that you play.
Yes.
I know myself, even of hearing about cases or reading cases that,
yes,
and then you realize, oh, this is real and this is going on in the world.
Yeah.
Yes. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that's why I think, good supervision is so important when you work in these kind of roles. And I've always been really lucky. I'm in an incredibly supportive and tight-knit team at the moment. And so, it's just been, I've been very lucky. So if you're going through something difficult or you're finding something difficult, there's always people to talk to about it.
Yeah, which is so great. It's so great to hear. And I do think that's important as well.
Yes, yeah.
I love that you kind of wove your working career, your life.
Yes.
Through this book. It's
Yeah.
quite fascinating to me. I wanted to say, for those that are yet to read the book, which has just recently come out, because, rush out and get it, believe me. But what I really found fascinating from a writing perspective is that you live in the town that you have based the book in, which of course is
Crow's Nest. Well, so I live in Toowoomba, which is where Dana is kind of has her base, and she goes out and works in Crow's Nest. So yes, I live in Toowoomba.
So I wanted to know what the reaction has been from Toowoomba, from the people living there, and to see a novel that's based, literally based in the town where they all live.
Yes.
Because some of this stuff is very gritty in this novel as well, and some of the characters are quite interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I think so far people have just been really excited, really. They've really enjoyed kind of reading a book which mentions places that they go to frequently and settings they're really familiar with. So, people have just been really excited so far. And, I had a baby and a toddler when I started writing this book. So it was just really important to me not to have to do too much research, to be honest. So, I set it in a place I was incredibly familiar with, just to make it easier on myself.
I think that's so clever, but also kind of fascinating as well. Do you think that the people, around you, like people living in Toowoomba, do you think when they read this novel, some of them will be like, I wonder if she was talking about me?
Yeah. It's very possible. But, as we all know, I guess crime and, that can happen anywhere, and child protection services, operate across the country in any demographic. So, this is a story that could have happened anywhere. I love the fact that Crow's Nest had such an atmospheric and kind of evocative name. So I always thought that'd be a fabulous name for a crime novel.
It is a fabulous name, but also too, I felt like I was there when I was reading. So you're very descriptive, which is really fantastic. And, you really, really do take the reader into these towns. I felt like I was really there. And I had no idea until I read this novel that Toowoomba is basically like full of gardens, and reading that in your book about all these sort of gardens and the descriptions of those gardens led me to then go, I'm going to go Google Toowoomba. And I went, look at that. Fascinating.
Yeah, we have some beautiful parks here. We're known as the kind of flower town, and we have the Carnival of Flowers every year, which brings a huge amount of tourism into the town.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated by the whole, true crime genre. I'm a huge fan of true crime, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I love reading a good crime book, novel. But I'm just fascinated to hear your opinion on this. Why do you think it seems to attract more women, this genre, than it does men? It's a fascinating topic.
I know. I have thought about that a lot, and I've often thought about why I'm so attracted to it, really. Honestly, I think on some subconscious level, maybe women are trying to prevent it happening to themselves a little bit. I honestly kind of think you always bring it back to yourself a little bit, and just and I guess you're trying to learn things about people that you can pass on to your friends and your family and children about the world and perhaps what kind of people not to hang around with. And I think it teaches us a lot of lessons.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating that and in some ways a little bit sad and bleak that as women, I do think we're trying to arm ourselves with as much knowledge as we can.
Definitely.
To keep ourselves safe. And it's funny because my partner said, what is it about women and true crime? And I said exactly that to him. I feel like we are trying to just know what we're up against, who's out there. And maybe through listening to some of these podcasts, we might find ourselves in a situation where you go, oh, I know
red flags. Happen. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It is fascinating. I mean,
it is.
And it seems to have cropped up. I mean, of course, there's always been crime novels. There's always been crime we've seen on television, docos, etc. But it seems to be this extraordinary genre, like perhaps since the rise of podcasts, that it's just everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, with the Lynette Dawson case, people across the country were just, riveted by it and following and just really hoping and praying to get some justice for her. So that was just so exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that don't know what we're talking about, it's an extraordinary podcast called The Teacher's Pet. And because of that podcast, obviously, they reopened a cold case and they actually have arrested Lynette's husband for her murder. And it's just such a fascinating podcast to listen to. But it's a really interesting one as well because the podcast was out there, it could have actually gone the other way, in terms of the court case where they were saying, how do we get people who are unbiased, because this is such an extraordinary podcast in terms of listenership. Like it had such an extraordinary listenership.
Yes.
And went global, right?
Yeah.
People around the world were listening to it.
Yep.
Incredible.
Yes.
The other one, I've actually had Sally Layden on this podcast, who, of course, her mother is the subject of The Lady Vanishes, which is the Channel 7 podcast of Marion Barter, which has had, I think, over 8 million downloads or something.
I haven't caught up with that one yet.
Yeah.
So
it's called The Lady Vanishes.
Right.
Because of the podcast, again, they've had to actually, they finally opened this cold case, and it is now the subject of an inquiry, which they're yet to pass down the findings of that inquiry, but quite phenomenal.
Yes.
So it's the power of that, I think.
Yes, definitely. That's right. With so many people getting behind it and, can really kind of possibly enact justice after so long. I think people get excited by that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. You've kind of professed, I'm going to read it. I've got questions here that I really want to ask you because I think they're quite important.
Yeah.
But you've got a real interest in miscarriages of justice. And that clearly comes through in this book, where you talk about, I guess, flawed human beings in police services, flawed investigations that go on.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it was a bit more of an issue in the 90s. And I feel like the policing service has, and, all the services around the police have kind of learnt from that a little bit now. And, if something like that happens these days, they send out a task force and they kind of get straight onto it because they know how expensive and horrible and tragic it is for everyone to have to do 3 inquests and just how awful that is. So I do feel like it's a bit of, something that was more relevant in the 90s.
Hello, Sandy here from the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to see the rest of the video, please head over to WB40.com and subscribe to WB40 Extra. By subscribing to WB40 Extra, you're helping to support the hard-won wisdom of incredible women. So thank you. Please remember to like, share and follow.